Hello. I am sitting here. It's my great pleasure to be having a little bit of tea with my friend, my good friend, Ann Coleman. I'm sure she's familiar to all of you. She has been such an influence in the doll community. She is a researcher extraordinaire. She's been curators of museums. She's an expert on textiles. She is, besides an author, she is a renowned speaker. And I'm sure most of you think that she's very, very dignified, which sometimes she can be. But most of us who've known her call her Trouble, or most recently, the Oracle.
Chris, it's so nice to be here with you today and allowing me to step down from my position on Mount Olympus.
Well, we are honored. I would bow at your feet, but I've got a bad neck.
And I've got a bad back.
And I've got bad eyes.
And I've got a bad tongue.
All right. So, shall we start at the beginning? I think most people would wonder how this process started. I mean, the Encyclopedia of Dolls is still the reference book of all time. And if anybody here doesn't have it, they should. So I know you actually started collecting when you were young. Is that correct?
Dolls came to me very early in my existence. And I've reached an age where I can now say that I'm in my 9th decade, so that if you think I'm a little exuberant in my actions and don't stand up to the age you think I should be representing, that's my problem, not yours. There are pictures of me as a child, very young, in a teeter-totter, and I have a segmented doll attached to the teeter-totter. It was probably, it was segmented wood, and it was probably painted with lead paints. And I have always had an affinity for things going in my mouth, food, other things, and I'm sure that I took to this thing as a teething device and consumed a fair amount of lead paint, which probably has influenced my life greatly.
Oh my gosh. I think it's wonderful though that you have pictures of yourself with dolls and your sister also, Jane.
Well, it's a genetic.
Yeah, why don't you talk about your mom and what her...
Well, I'm going to go back even further than that.
You could do that.
I have a photograph of my grandfather taken in about 1890 in a photographer's studio in Middlebury, Vermont. And guess what he's got in his hands?
He has a doll?
A doll.
Did it make it through the ages or no?
I don't know whether it was a studio prop that
okay.
had to keep him calm, or whether it probably wasn't in the family because he had only one sister, and she was sort of the, he had 5 brothers, and I think it was 5 brothers, and the eldest was his sister, and she was the person who brought the boys up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And because the mother was off doing early suffragette things.
Interesting.
Yes.
That's very cool. So your family's been about causes, I mean, because...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh,
so then your mother...
My mother, like any lucky little middle-class girl, had her collection of dolls. And they survive today, I'm pleased to say. And one graces the cover of the first encyclopedia, the big K-Star or Simon and Hal Big Baby doll. And that was not her favorite doll. her favorite doll was another Simon and Halbig headed doll, Goldie, who had a wardrobe of clothes, and Goldie, there's a wardrobe of her own clothes. There's a paper doll that my mother had some input into the making of.
Wow.
That has clothes that I think were in my mother's wardrobe and in Goldie's wardrobe. Goldie's only come down with one dress, which I still have the dress that it was based on that my mother wore.
Wow.
So there's a tie-in with the family things through dolls for both the human owner and the doll.
That's amazing. So I know, I was going to ask you about the difference between ephemera and provenance, but it sounds like your family, did you even know that you were creating provenance for, was your mother aware that this was a very important part of collecting? Or? No,
because you see, my mother came to her association with dolls through my sister and myself. She did it, I have always surmised, in self-defense, because she had two girls who had this bizarre interest in not only dolls of their own generation, but dolls from other places and dolls from other times.
And I think that's interesting, since we've been talking about this. I think probably a lot of people might have the misconception that it was your mother who started this process, but it wasn't. It was you and Jane.
But my mother had talents which made our work really important. She was a professional genealogist, so she knew how to do research, particularly in following businesses and families. And that's what the encyclopedias are all about, following doll businesses, doll families, as they go through the years.
So I know that you and Jane collected. When did your family move to London?
We went in 1953, right after the coronation.
Oh, okay, so you were there right after.
But we'd already established what we were going to collect. First doll that formed the foreign doll collection was sent to me in 1946, and it's a Mexican doll, and to this day I have the letters saying that the doll is being shipped from Mexico City. I have the packing label.
Wow.
I have all of these wonderful things, paper backup of the doll. The doll is not a particularly wonderful one, but to me she is an extraordinary landmark. And because there was a later photograph of my sister taking with the doll, I always began to think that the doll was Jane's, not mine, but the letters of transmittal say, these dolls were for EA, one of my other names, because I am Elizabeth Ann Coleman.
And yet most people know you by Ann, and your sister was
Evelyn Jane.
Yeah.
And then, because of my mother's business in doing professional genealogy, she and my grandmother went down to my grandmother's hometown of Cape May, New Jersey one year, and they came back with antique dolls for my sister and myself.
Ooh.
Really, really old, important dolls, Hertwig lowbrows. And those are the dolls that started our interest in antique dolls. And when we got to England, that's when we started really our lifelong interest in antique dolls.
Wow. So
and within 10 days of our landing in England, I had gone by myself on public transportation in England to buy a doll that lived with me for 2 years in an English boarding school.
Wow.
Now this doll is a wax-headed doll in a case, and from the 1860s, a little boy in a girls' dormitory. So he had lots of stories to tell. And unfortunately, he saw things that he really shouldn't have seen, and he lost his eyes. And we had to wait till came back to this country to get his eyes reset. And at that point, it was discovered that he had a voice box.
No kidding.
But I'm sorry, I've never been able to understand squeakeries.
Well, his voice box probably stopped working because of what he'd seen.
Yes, exactly.
So I know that Janet Jall, who was an early collector and author, originally sent out an advertisement, right, to have
Yes.
people, to have, if there was any interest in anybody doing a book about dolls. When was it that your family decided that you were going to take this project on?
Well, my mother thought that because my sister and I were investing money in dolls, we ought to know what we were investing in. And so, living in Washington, D.C., and not having contacts on the Hill and so forth, it was not easy for me to get a summer job. And so she suggested that over the summers, in high school, that I start to do research on doll companies. My first accumulation was a typescript of 18 pages. And out of those 18 pages grew the 18 pounds of the 3 major Coleman books, the 2 encyclopedias and the closed book. And then there are other Coleman publications and magazines and other little publications. And my first publication was while I was still in school, and I, who am dyslexic and failed high school English, and when I wasn't working on dolls during the summer, was taking remedial typing classes, typed on a portable typewriter the first book, Dolls, Makers, and Marks, and did the layout of the book myself.
Wow.
And I've always thought that was really a major accomplishment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's amazing.
So that's where we started. And the thing is that at that point, if you ask doll collectors what those funny things on the back of the necks and bodies generally were, they had no idea about what a mark really could tell you about the doll. And that's where we lucked into something that was new and interesting, and something that people could really begin to learn more about the background of their particular doll.
That's amazing. So I know there was a 20-year gap between the first encyclopedia and the second encyclopedia, but in the meantime there was a encyclopedia of doll clothes. And I want to talk about that because most people should be, but particularly costumers should know about this. And what was the impetus to that particular encyclopedia with the doll clothes?
I think that my mother thought that because I had a job as a museum curator of historic costumes, that looking at the experiences that I had had with people clothes could be utilized in understanding doll clothes. And that's how the book on doll clothes came about. And each one of us had our specialty in the compilation of the books. I was the photographer, and I also did the drawings of the markings, and I did the drawings of the patterns. The patterns in the closed book were taken from the period patterns. They were not meant to be copied and used by doll dressmakers, because this is the way they were presented to the public at the time they were produced. And if I had had to correct every pattern in that clothes book, I'd still be correcting those patterns. And the other thing that we did was, unlike Janet Joel, who regurgitated the correspondence that she had with doll collectors, we looked at each doll that we took the published the marks of, and because sometimes collectors don't understand how to read, and we had more correspondence about Madeline dolls. That in the early years there were so many Madeline dolls you cannot imagine.
Madeline?
Madeline, made in Germany.
Sorry. I have to laugh though, because now since we're here, what is your opinion of the names that early collectors attached to dolls, like Milliner's Model and Frozen Charlotte and Lowbrow? And
I think they're very creative. Have nothing to do with the dolls themselves. And they're a bloody obstacle now because they've become part of the lore. But doll collecting, that's not the only area in the decorative arts, and I put dolls under decorative arts items. So much of furniture has been reassigned names which are more historically correct. Take what collectors first started calling in the 1930s Frozen Charlottes. A fair number of those were little boys, excuse me.
true.
So you can tell that by their hair.
Right,
styling.
because it has the side part.
Side part. Okay, there's that issue. Then, more recently, they've been replaced by Frozen Charlies. Now, that's also a misnomer, but they have the best name possible if you go back to the German catalogs, the manufacturers and distributors' catalogs. These were known at the time that they were made as bad Kinder. Bad being not our definition of bad, but the German meaning of bad, which means bath. Because these dolls, unlike a lot of others, could be dunked in water.
I have to laugh because last night Anne shared a program that she had done, and I was reading it last night, and she kept saying, you know, bad Kinder, bad Kinder. It's like, why is she calling these dolls bad? And then finally, like 10 pages in, you said bad was bath. I felt kind of like most collectors who do something like that, like Madeline dolls.
Yeah.
So,
but I always think that we have so many things that we think of in terms of today's identification, when in actuality, the original name gives away the real reason why they should be called what they were called originally.
Yeah. So you have also, I have this book here. You also wrote on your own, it's called The Opulent Era. It is out of print, but this is a wonderful book. It's about Worth, Doucet, and Pingot. And this is while you were at the Museum of Brooklyn?
Brooklyn Museum.
And what prompted you to write about these three?
Because Brooklyn at that point had a fantastic collection of Worth garments. and it also had some garments associated with Jacques Doucet. And Jacques Doucet, for those who don't know, is very important in doll history because he was a doll collector.
Okay.
Now, I was not trying to push that in this publication, but he was one of the founders of the first doll clubs in the world in Paris about 1900.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you started, it was sort of everything, I think, was the doll community very collaborative. Everybody was trying to find information.
No, there was backbiting then. If you don't, things don't change. People don't change.
But that was never your, you were sharing all this knowledge with the world, so you didn't.
Yes, but it also, unfortunately, puts you in another plateau. And people have said to me over the years, "Oh, Anne, we were just so afraid to come up and speak to you. You live on Mount Olympus, in our opinion." Well, I'm sorry. I don't live on Mount Olympus. I get dirt under my fingernails all the time.
Well, I think
I'm groveling.
But I think that is sort of the, when you are well known, your family is like basically the first family of doll collecting because everyone knows the Coleman name. But when I met you, I was like, oh my God. And we hit it off right away. You're very warm and welcoming, and you're always learning, aren't you?
Me? I'm always, a day doesn't go by. And that's what makes life so wonderful for me is that if you ask me when I last had the television set on, probably January of this year.
Wow.
I am so busy that trying to help collectors along, they're asking me questions constantly, and I'm thinking, I'm not getting any of my own work done. But at the same time, if I don't answer people's questions, I'm not supporting the development and growth of the hobby.
And how do you think that we can, as collectors, longtime collectors, revitalize and get people interested in our hobby?
Make it more joyful. Make it more fun. All we're doing is, as collectors, we are part of a club that I have lifetime membership in. It costs me, I can't tell you the expense of it. It's the Peter Pan Club. You never grow up. And because it's the spirit of youth and enjoyment in life, there are no dues. You give, you get.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Particularly dolls are such a joyful, I feel. I mean, I find so much joy in my hobby, and I think sometimes that might get lost. But for young collectors, would you agree it doesn't matter? You shouldn't collect what other people think you should collect. You should just collect what gives you joy.
What you get pleasure from. And don't be told that you need to get something because somebody else gets it. You should get it because you are going to get enjoyment out of it yourself, that it's something that's going to challenge your mind, expand your horizons, and use it for learning experiences from the bodies out. I have certain pet peeves about collecting. First of all, I think collectors have been foolish over the years because they have focused on the heads and they haven't focused on the bodies. And there are just as many wonderful things to be discovered in doll bodies, including the, oh my God, what were they thinking when they made that? I mean, I've seen a doll where the legs are like that and the torso's like that.
Yeah, you wonder, some people, it's like your spatial awareness is really bad.
But I mean, again, it brings pleasure to you to see this, to me, vastly out of proportion. But this was a doll that was loved and cherished by somebody. And this was the best they could do. And it doesn't have to be perfection every time.
No, sometimes the ones that are worn and out of proportion and are the ones that were the most loved, and that gives them such value.
The question, as you might guess, that I get asked all the time, it seems like, is, what is your favorite doll? And
yeah, go ahead.
I say, I'm never going to own my favorite doll. And why am I never going to own it? It's in a museum. And I happened to be with my mother and sister with the curator shortly after he acquired the doll. And the doll happens to be in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the doll is an old shoe. An old man shoe, but not, forget how you should put the old and the man together. Don't know whether the man was old when he had the shoe. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, where's the English language taking me to? But it is a man's shoe, and it was worn.
Wow.
And the face is the heel. The head is the upper part of the heel, and that has the cap over it. The body is the body of the shoe. It's been given arms, and it was picked off of a child on the streets. And Patrick Murray, the founder of the museum, traded it with a child for a contemporary doll.
Wow.
But you know that doll, that shoe, was told so many secrets, brought so much joy to that child that had it originally, that it touches my heart in such a way. All the lace in the world cannot
replace that.
And that's what I think that dolls should do for children, and that should do the same sort of thing for the adult collector.
So I want you to tell me first of all, who did you dislike the most in the doll community?
I have only one person.
Okay, so tell me a funny story about how you found a doll.
A funny story?
The funny story where you just randomly,
Funny story about
okay, so I mean, my funny story is I was holding a doll and there was someone who was dancing around behind me who buys a lot of dolls. And she looked at me and I was holding the doll and she said, "Are you buying that?" And I said, "I am now."
I always have felt that if I'm meant to have a doll, I'm meant to have it. If I'm not meant to have it, that particular doll, it's not going to come home with me. And a lot of dolls have come into the house over the years, and too many have come in, and very few have had a one-way ticket. and most of the collection has been built around dolls that we've been able to use in our publications for one reason or another. So that it's not necessarily things that we bought because they touched our hearts. It's because they had a practical reason, which sounds cold and non-caring, but at the same time, there was a need for
what's
them
interesting
to share.
Yeah. Because I know that you did not repeat in the second encyclopedia anything from the first encyclopedia.
No.
New pictures, new dolls,
and we added 5 whole years. And the first book, the first encyclopedia, went through 26 editions.
Wow.
26 editions.
That's fabulous.
And a couple of years ago, it celebrated its 50th anniversary. Wow. And people are still buying the bloody book.
Oh yeah, I go to it. I still refer to it because I think one of the things that I feel is that you went to sources. You were able to get the actual physical documents.
That was always one of the things that has been important to us, is to have the evidence. Now, not all evidence is valid, and the current rage for Google is a perfect case. I mean, everybody says now, oh, you can find it on the internet. Well, you can find a lot of good things, and you can find a lot of things that are not accurate.
Well, isn't it true, too, with the internet, people have more access to it, but if there is an incorrect program or an incorrect article, it can be recycled over and over. And, yeah.
And once it's in print, it's engraved on a tombstone, if you know what I mean.
I know.
And to get it wiped off that tombstone is an ordeal.
I mean, so in terms of research, do you think the internet has harmed research or helped it?
I think in many respects it's harmed it. And the really sad thing is that there are so few books being published about dolls today.
Yeah.
You can get it off the net. You can get it off the net. You can get it off the net.
That's a
but
shame.
you have to know how to evaluate the
information that you're getting.
Yeah.
Because even in my profession, I start with Google sometimes, but I also go and then we'll say, okay, this is this. I know this is boring, I'm a tax accountant, but it will have a code section, and then I actually go to the actual physical source, and I don't think most people tend to do that.
It takes a long while to get back to the...
to get down to the bibliography of where this information came from, and some of that information, the old information, isn't online.
The old information can be as good, the old information can be bad. It's this winnowing out of getting back as close as you can to the original source.
So besides yourselves, because your family obviously is fantastic, who do you think was one of the best researchers in terms of doll research?
In terms of doll research, I think probably Mary Hilliard comes to mind. She's an English, or was an English author on dolls.
She did wax dolls too, right?
Yes. But she combed the records that were available in the UK and brought a lot of new information to bear. And she also understood that just because it was printed, it needed checking even further, going back to the original sources. And you have to, I mean, even things like city directories, you have to be careful on those, because in many countries, in many cities, so forth, you paid to get an entry in. Some of them, it was an automatic thing where you got into it. But just because you find the name first appearing in, say, 1877, does not mean that that's when they started in business. They could well have been in business for 15, 20 years in advance, but they didn't have the money to advertise their business until 1877.
Well, that's even...
And this was particularly true with the French companies.
Right. Well, I know even when I was reading about Doucet, that he started as a men's, haberdasher.
Yeah.
But the advertising comes much later, even like with Worth, the beginning, all doll collectors, let's face it, in Sonnenberg and, the wooden dolls that we can't really identify, and they've been making dolls for years and years before there was identification. But part of the reason why is I don't think at that time they were just thinking they were toys.
One has to remember that dolls on the artifact list are down very close to the bottom because they were thought of as being expendable.
Yeah.
And it's only within the last 100 years or so, 110, 15 years, that there have been two types of dolls. There have been the art dolls, identified as art dolls for collectors, and the dolls that were designed for children that were commercially available. That doesn't mean that there weren't some other art dolls that were made, but those were made specifically for closed groups.
Okay. Well, I know that really when you think about it, if you look at automatons, that even though they have doll heads, they weren't meant for children. They were meant for adults to play with. They were, but I think it's wonderful that we have new doll artists who are creating, and on that subject,
because it's the continuation of play.
Exactly.
It's feeding another channel of interest.
I have a question for you. So
One question for me?
Well, I have.
Excuse me, I'm counting.
We could be here forever if time allowed. I would just be bending your ear. But I know that with your history with textiles and your knowledge of the colors and the type of materials used and everything, what is, and by the way, watch a video that is called The Hats, Take Your Hat Off, or there's one with Anne that she does not like people putting adult ladies' hats on child dolls. But how do you feel about the resurgence of, doll costuming and
I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant in many ways, because it's teaching, as dolls were designed to do from the get-go, it's teaching skills. It's extending people's horizons. It's feeding them information that they may never have thought when they got up 3 weeks before that they would have any interest in, and it's now suddenly given them a lifetime passion. And what could be better than that?
That's true. So now I know, with your passion for doll collecting and your passion for fashion and textiles and everything, are you an expert seamstress?
I am an expert nothing. Expert is the word I hate most in the English language.
Really?
Absolutely. I'm a rank amateur in everything I do. emphasis on the rank.
Well, I must be really rank then if you're right.
I'm learning.
I think that's the thing, is you're an eternal student. And I think people who are people who become very involved in doll collecting or in fashion or in costuming realize the more you know, the more you don't
Want to know.
I mean,
And
you would think that, oh, I'm going to collect dolls, and then you get down to it's like, okay, now it's this narrow and this narrow, because you just can't know everything. You can't.
No. And I mean, unfortunately, I haven't been able to have the luxury of learning all there is to know about one type of doll. Ask me about the German bisques of the early 20th century. And I'll let the listener translate that however they want.
So the first article you wrote, though, when you were in college, was about a baby doll. Is that not correct?
Yes, we start with them young.
Yep. And it was about a doll. Was it Hungarian manufacturer?
No.
Okay, see, I got that wrong.
No.
See, rank.
When we first began collecting, we were in the generation that had Bilo babies as their play doll. You know, after all, they were the $1 million baby. And there are an awful lot of them out there, primarily in bisque heads. And I mean, there was so many of them made that they had to involve several bisque manufacturers to keep up with the demand. And as I say, this was early days of our collecting, and we went to an antique store, and there was a baby doll that looked just like a Bilo. And we bought it for $17.50, and we got it home, and we looked at the mark on a Bilo head and that we had in our files already, and this mark didn't match the Bilo marking at all. It was a Louis Amberg and Son.
Oh.
And it had 1914 on the back of its head. Now, Bilo was 1923, I believe.
Right. I know it was 20s, but...
What happened was that this doll turned out, it was called the Newborn Babe. It was a Louis Amberg and Son doll, and they had hired the Hungarian artist, Juno Jusko, to create this head of a newborn babe. And the 1914 is the year in which this doll was put on the market.
Wow.
And we all know what happened in 1914. And if we don't, something really serious called World War I happened, and trade with Germany, particularly for non-essential things like dolls, instantly cut off. And so this baby was a victim
of the war.
Of World War I.
Wow.
And if you put the Bilo and the newborn babe side by side, they're, you could easily be fooled by.
Wow.
And when the Bilo came out, Amberg tried to reintroduce, but Borgfeldt was that much further ahead with the Bilo.
But they did Dream Babies, though, right? Or was that the other?
Well, everybody got in on the
baby part,
the newborn baby part. But the reissuance or bringing to market of the newborn babe just didn't fly.
That's amazing. Timing is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It really is.
But it just shows you how much world politics and situations influence the doll market, influence what a child can have as a plaything. Again, if you're interested in dolls, there's the manufacturing side of them that's fascinating. There is the fashion or clothing side of them that's absolutely fascinating. There's the, if they're images of notable personages, that's fascinating. However you look at a doll, there's something to learn about the materials, the manufacturing, the distribution, the people who were involved. And you can go travel and find out what the places look like yourself.
That's amazing. So what would you say to people that are still collecting, that they can talk to the Oracle?
The Oracle is always open to questions. And the Oracle enjoys communicating with collectors because the Oracle, believe it or not, still tries to learn.
Well, I really appreciate this. We could go for hours, but we're going to have to go off camera because there's other stuff we're going to talk about that I don't think should be on film.
Oh, good.
Anyway, thank you so much, Anne. It was always so much fun to be with you.
Well, Chris, it's always wonderful to be with you and to be here at the Grovian Museum and to be part of World Doll Day, because dolls have been part of the planet's growth and development for millennia, and may they continue on for millennia more.
Cheers.
To dolls, to friends.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.